Behind every great cup of coffee is a great grinder. No matter the brewing method, until you obtain a grinder, you're going to get mediocre results compared to the best. Think of a grinder as like chopping your stir-fry vegetables. If you chop too fine, they're soggy and too done. Too coarse, they aren't cooked enough. One of my favorite coffee books, I know you're not going to believe this, but one of my favorite coffee books is Goldilocks and the Three Bears because it perfectly teaches the concept of just right. Same with grinders. One company that leads the grinding area is, at least in consumer gear, is the U.S. company Baratza. Baratza came from the Bay Area and is a clear leader in home coffee grinders. Today we have Jens, who's a guy Baratza has who teaches and specializes in making their technology understandable to us poor, grateful consumers. Pierce, how are you?
I'm doing excellent, Kevin.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. Well, Pierce is with me, ready to take it. I miscued him, but I'm going to say it again. Hey, Pierce, how are you?
I'm doing good, Kevin. How you doing?
I'm good. I think I've had a lot of coffee, and the presentations are going great. I'm learning stuff myself. I'm actually taking some notes while I'm listening, and I've got some to take when you talk to us. So I'm really appreciate you being with us today. And here's what I'm gonna do, just to save time. I'll throw to you, and I'll save any questions that I get, in online till the end, and then let's do it that way. I think it'll be more efficient.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Well, shall I get into it here, Kevin?
Thanks.
Here's what we got. Introduction, both of myself and Baratza. Why you'd want to grind your coffee fresh, why you'd use a burr grinder. Hopefully I can sell you on those two so you can think about what burr grinder is right for me. And then we'll end off with how you would use your burr grinder. I'm hoping that will spark an opportunity for some questions to come up for you. One of my favorite things about doing these CoffeeCon presentations is the back and forth with the customers, and it's a little bit different. Today, of course, we have the COVID pleasure of dealing with here when it comes to logistics, but I really am hoping that we can get some great Q&A going on at the end. We'll do first an introduction of myself. I'm Jens with Baratza. I've been with Baratza for over 10 years now, which is hard to believe for me looking back. I have here a picture of myself from 2014, so not quite 10 years ago. It's not just a short-haired and a long-haired Pierce, but I'm just trying to show you who I am and how long I've been here with Baratza. In my time at Baratza, I've both been in support and I've been the support manager. That's my current role. And that has created some wonderful opportunities for me to have conversations with people at all places in their coffee journey. People are just starting out to people who are professionals and way beyond where I'm at. And that opportunity for different conversations has been awesome for me because it's let me meet people where they're at and explain things in different ways. And I'm hoping that because of this experience I've had, I can do a good job of helping you with your coffee journey. Baratza is a coffee grinder manufacturer. That is all we do. We do specialty coffee grinders. I have here our lineup of coffee grinders, and we'll talk a little bit more when we're looking at features to think about in coffee grinders later on, what we have here in our lineup. But let me talk just a little bit about Baratza as a company in general. Because our niche is coffee grinders, we really lean into looking for opportunities to make them better, and to make them better means to make them a better tool for helping you enjoy delicious coffee. So innovation has been really an integral part of Baratza. We've brought to market micro adjustment, grind by weight, and grind by weight into your portafilter. Another part of our ethos that I particularly love, both from my support perspective, but also on a personal level, I like to work on machines and to fix things. And in this day and age, this idea of throw it away and replace it seems to be just too pervasive, but not here at Baratza. Our ethos of sustainability is hallmarked by our slogan, "Don't dump it, fix it." And it's not just a talk. We also walk the walk, starting with the design phase. You have to start with something good to end up with something good. And we'll come back to that a little bit later when we're talking about why you'd grind fresh. But when we're looking at our coffee grinders, they are designed to be repaired. And we back up that design with the next step of offering parts so that you can repair them. And we offer them at a price that encourages you to repair them yourself. In support, I, again, deal with people of all levels of coffee knowledge. I also deal with all people with all levels of technical expertise. And it's been really fun over the years helping people who say, oh gosh, I've never fixed anything before like that. I don't know which end of a screwdriver to hold, for example. But when they look at the content that we offer in terms of PDF guides or videos that help you fix your grinder at home, it's really empowering. And when you couple that with the pricing of our parts and the fact that they can be repaired, I've had some amazing follow-ups from customers just glowing with being able to repair their appliance for the first time ever, and they're able to get an even longer life out of it. Let's switch gears and let's look at why you would want to grind your coffee fresh. My first topic here in this why you'd grind your coffee fresh is a little bit of a difficult idea for me to communicate. And what it relates to is the care that has gone into creating the coffee that you're brewing. So I'm going to walk us through a bit of the process that comes into creating specialty coffee and then link that to the grinding. So bear with me and I'll see if I can connect the dots for you, and then I'll also have an analogy at the end that will hopefully help folks who aren't clicking with this foodie aspect. The definition of specialty coffee, here's the Wikipedia definition. It's coffees that are scored with greater than 80 points out of 100 on this grading scale. The grading scale is something that I'm not well equipped to explain to you. What I want you to read in this definition is that specialty coffee is the best of the best. It is literally the best coffee in the world. The Specialty Coffee Association has a better definition for specialty coffee, that I invite you to read here. My takeaway from this definition is that specialty coffee is really the product of people who are dedicated, experienced, knowledgeable professionals, and it's accumulation of skills of different people in different areas of life that leads to creating the coffee which we deem to be specialty. Let's zoom in and look at who is involved in creating specialty coffee, and it all starts at the source. You have to start with something good to end with something good. And when we're talking about coffee beans, it starts with growing of the coffee farmer. Farming coffee is a science and it is an art, and it takes people who really care and want to do a good job and are equipped with the right tools and knowledge to do that job, and that is the farmers. The farmers sometimes will have generations of knowledge going into the growing of their crops. From farming, we get the coffee, and it's the coffee bean that actually has a fruit attached to the outside of it. And these two need to be parsed apart to get the green coffee bean that we roast, grind, and enjoy. And parsing that fruit away from the coffee bean is, again, an art, it's a science, it's a profession, and it takes skill. How you do it really affects the flavor of your coffee. So we have, again, another vertical of expertise that goes into preparing the coffee that eventually may become specialty coffee. And after it is grown and the fruit is pulled away from the coffee bean, then the green coffee buyer comes in and makes an assessment, makes a grade of the coffee on this 100-point scale, and deems whether or not it is specialty coffee. Another fully blown profession, art, science to it, and it's actually a sensory science. So this is the SCAA's coffee taster flavor wheel, and this is a description of the different flavors that you would find in a coffee bean. And the balance of these flavors and how they show up is what the green coffee buyer is looking for. They're looking for a balance of the actual chemical compounds in the green coffee bean that are there because of the processing, because of the growing. So it must be grown, processed, picked to have the right mix of these, to have the right flavors at the end of the day, to be delicious. That's what specialty coffee is all about. All right, so we have coffee grown, processed, picked. Now we got to roast it. Again, another vertical of expertise or profession. The roaster takes this green coffee bean through a chemical transformation and highlights the flavors in that specific bean to really best showcase the care that's gone into it at this point. And from there, it's your turn to grind the coffee. And let me connect the dots now to why fresh ground is best. When you are grinding the coffee bean, what you're actually doing is you're splitting it up and you're exposing more surface area of that coffee bean. You do this so that when you're brewing coffee, the water is exposed to a lot of surface area, or the bean is exposed to a lot of surface area for the water to get with it and actually pull the good solubles out of the bean. Well, if you grind coffee and you don't brew with it, it still has a lot more surface area exposed, but rather than being exposed so that water can draw the good stuff out, it's exposed to the air, and the air will draw the good stuff out of the ground coffee. There are some delicate aromatics in roasted coffee that will degrade through oxidation, which Luigi and Eric mentioned a little bit in their chat about espresso earlier on. So when you grind your coffee, you really want to use it as soon as possible. Otherwise, you're losing out on some of these delicate flavors that are in there because of all the care that went into picking that coffee, processing that coffee, growing that coffee, roasting that coffee. It's you at the last step that can really highlight all the care that's gone into expressing the coffee bean itself. So when Kevin and I were doing the interview for CoffeeCon, we were talking about this idea. You can see how long it took me to go through that background of why you'd want to grind your coffee fresh so that you get the best flavor out of it. I mean, it seems like a simple concept, but I wanted to make sure to stress all the care that's gone into it and how much of an effect that has on the flavor in the cup. And this is not an uncommon theme in cooking. I mean, Kevin was using just in the intro for me now. There's a lot of examples like that in food science, you know, fresh garlic versus dried garlic or herbs. But what kind of example, metaphor can we use that's outside of the spectrum of food? And when Kevin and I were doing the interview, we talked about high fidelity stereo at the end. And that was an interesting link for me outside of the food spectrum. And I wanted to walk through this in case there's anyone watching who's having trouble understanding why fresh is best, with the hope that connecting it to something outside of food will be some connecting dots. So if you look at someone who's an experienced guitarist, they're the source, they're the producer, they are like the coffee farmer. They're really good, they have a lot of skill, they have a lot of experience. And when you're listening to their music live, it's amazing. But when you're listening to music at home, there's a couple of more steps in the process. You have the person who's just this awesome musician, and their music is being recorded. And the person who's doing the recording is also someone who is really experienced at their trade. They're using the right equipment, they're using the right techniques, and this is similar to the processing and roasting aspects that I was going through earlier. And then it comes to you, the home brewer, the home listener, and you have something that's had a lot of care put into it. If you play it on a regular stereo, you might lose out on some of those aspects that are only in there because of the care that went into the recording, because of the skill and experience of the producer, of the musician. That's where a hi-fi stereo can be really fun. You get to hear the breathing in of the musician. You get to hear the twang of the strings in a different way. And it's really something delightful. Anyway, I hope that clicks with someone out there. Why you would want to grind your coffee fresh is so that you can really experience and express the coffee to the highest degree possible. Another really big component to grinding fresh is that grind size affects flavor. And we talked about that in the espresso chat too. I mean, Luigi and Eric talked about that you want to go finer or coarser to get the flavor to where you want it to be. And that's the same thing with all types of coffee because it affects extraction. But grind size also needs to be changed to suit different brewing methods. If you're doing a French press or you're doing a Kalita, using the same grind size for the two is not going to get you the flavor that you're looking for, maybe in either, depending on what grind size it is that you're using. Grinding fresh gives you the opportunity to not only adjust your grind, to really look for the sweet spot in finding the right flavor, but it also lets you use different brew methods. You can get whole beans and you can grind them for French press, and you can grind them the next day at a finer grind for a Kalita or a V60. Why grind fresh again is you want to continue this care to maximize the flavor through minimizing oxidation, and you want to be able to adjust your grind size for different brew methods and dialing in your brew methods. All right, so why a burr grinder? You're thinking, okay, I can understand, Pierce, why I would want to grind fresh, but can't I just use the blade grinder that I already have? And let me first go into what a burr grinder is. So I have here an image of the flat burrs and conical burrs from a couple of the grinders in the Baratza lineup. Flat and conical burr grinders are the most prevalent when you look at coffee grinders, home coffee grinders, that is. And on either flat or conical burrs, what we're dealing with is a precision-made cutting edge. This is a picture of the cone burr in our Virtuoso grinder. And look with me at the top of the cone burr. There's 6 points on the top. It looks a little bit like a star. If you work down, you can see that there's this swirl, this auger on the top 2/3 of the burr. And then near the bottom, that bottom third or so, there's some finer teeth. Well, the idea is that as the burr turns, this auger, it pulls the beans down and it pushes them down towards those finer teeth at the bottom, and they get cut between this cone burr and the ring burr. How many points are on this burr? What is the shape of that swirl in the auger? How many teeth are in the fine teeth? What's the spacing between them? All of this is not an accident. It is a very intentional design, and we're looking again at a deep vertical of expertise, knowledge, know-how, professionalism. And that is actually something that Baratza looks towards people who are experts in the field of when we're looking for burrs to put into our coffee grinder. So our coffee grinders use burrs from Ditting, Malkonig, and Etzinger. And you might be wondering, well, Baratza is a big coffee grinder company. Why don't they make their own burrs? We are experts in making coffee grinders, but this aspect of burr design and creation, it has so much know-how that goes into it that it's its own deal, and we want to lean into the knowledge and expertise of people who are experts in that field so that we can bring the best value to you in our coffee grinders. So reason one of why a burr grinder and not a different type of grinder for grinding fresh is burr grinders, coffee burr grinders, have a purpose-built cutting edge. They're built for the purpose of grinding whole roasted coffee beans. Another really big reason behind using a burr coffee grinder is that they all have controlled adjustability. And with that controlled adjustability comes repeatability. So I have a cartoon here of the flat burrs and the conical burrs that I had pictured before grinding coffee. You can see the whole coffee beans going in, the ground coffee getting kicked out. And what I want you to look and focus in on is the gap between those two burrs. When the beans are going through the burrs, they're reduced in size, and the biggest possible size the ground coffee can be is the size of that gap. If it's bigger than that gap, it's not going to fit through. It's not going to be able to go through your burrs. So you know that your grind is at least that big, and then you also have that precision-built cutting edge, which is reducing the in a very scientific way so that it produces a repeatable result. When you're grinding your coffee, if you keep that gap the same and you're using the same coffee and you're using the same burrs because you're using the one coffee grinder, then your results will be very, very repeatable. And they're very controllable. If you make the gap between the burrs a little bit less, if you make it a little bit more, you have the intentional design of the burr still reducing the bean in size. You have the gap controlling the maximum size that can come through. And that is a really key aspect to variable control. This is important because there are a lot of variables going on when you're making coffee. There's the beans that you're using, the origin that they're from, and then the processing is a part of that as well. There's the roast aspect, the brew method that you're using, the ratio of coffee to water, the temperature of the water that you're using, agitation, which is how much the water actually stirs up the coffee, the time that the coffee and the water are together. For time, it can be more representative of how the other variables are going, but you can also think about a cold brew that you put in a fridge overnight versus making hot coffee. Those are very different in terms of time and temperature. The water that you're using, again, Luigi and Eric were touching on hard water, and that is another science in itself. And then you have the grind size. I think of getting the best flavor out of your coffee as a quest. It's a series of experiments. You're trying to figure out what is it that I can do to really make this coffee the best possible. And if we zip back one slide, back to this variable slide, how would we control these? Well, the coffee beans and the roast, if you're using the same bag of beans, then you have those locked down. Brew method, you can use the same brew method again and again and keep that one in control. Ratio, that one you can control just by making sure you're using the same amount of coffee and water each time. Temperature, there's a lot of great kettles on the market these days. You can set the temperature and know that you're using the same temperature water. Agitation can be controlled with some intentional pouring or by using something that is automated, think like a drip coffee maker. Time, you can keep an eye on that and control that with the other variables and to some extent. If you're using the same water, you have that one in control. And then grind size, that's the one that you control with the coffee grinder. All right, so we're thinking about experimentation, and that makes me think back to grade school. And I don't know how many viewers out there did this in grade school, but I remember doing experiments where you would have a pea seed and you would grow it with water and you would grow it with Mountain Dew, and you would see how that affected how the peas' germination and growth actually went. And I remember my science teacher was really, really stressing that when you're designing the experiment, you want to have controls and you want to have one single variable. The reason behind that is if you have more than one variable, you're not sure which change is causing the results that you're finding. Whereas if you have one variable and you run a couple instances with that one variable changing, then you can directly link that to the change in results. When you're making coffee, it can feel like quite the experiment. Here's a screen grab from Flubber with Robin Williams. And this level of craziness in science and chemistry might be what it feels like when you're trying to make coffee. But the burr grinder and an attentional approach to finding the best flavor can really go a long ways in simplifying that. Now let's connect the dots back to this idea of using a burr grinder to grind fresh instead of some other type of grinder. And I have a cartoon weed whacker here because a common other type of grinder at home is the blade grinder. And the blade grinder works by whipping a blade around that hits whatever it's in its way and it breaks it down in size. And it's a fantastic tool for grinding fresh, but it's not a fantastic tool for getting repeatable results or consistent results because of the mechanics of how it functions. If you compare this weed whacker style grinder to a burr grinder, you look at the fact that a burr grinder is a precision built cutting edge and that it has this specific gap between the two cutting edges that regulates the grind size. That's just above and beyond in terms of control and adjustability compared to a blade grinder. So really why you'd want to use a burr grinder to grind fresh is because of that purpose-built cutting edge and the fact that it has a high level of control and adjustability to it. All right, now I hopefully have you sold not only on grinding fresh, but also on using a burr grinder to grind fresh. And maybe you're thinking at this point, what burr grinder is right for me? Quick and easy answer, Baratza Encore. Don't forget, I'm from Baratza. I have to say this because the Encore is our #1 seller for a great reason. It has a lot of bang for the buck packed under the hood. This is a grinder that is very versatile. It'll grind for your cold brew course. It'll get down to your espresso grind. It does the grinding fresh. It has those precision made burrs inside it, and it's our best seller for a reason. There are other features and other grinders to think of though, outside of Baratza included. And so let me touch on some other considerations you might make if you're looking at upgrading or getting a burr grinder. Micro adjustment is one that you really want to take into consideration if you're doing espresso. Again, something Luigi and Eric touched on. What micro adjustment is the capability to make really small adjustments to your grind size. When you're actually looking at the grind size of your coffee, it's measured in microns. And so the micro adjustment, it makes micron-sized adjustments to your grind size. And this shows up in your espresso extraction by allowing you to make such small changes to the grind size that you can get as little as a 1 second change in your shot time. Now, espresso is what I want you to think when I say micro adjustment, because micro adjustment doesn't make a very big effect on the grind size, and that magnitude of effect is critical for doing espresso, but it actually doesn't even show up when you're doing manual pour over or other brew methods out. So micro adjustment is a must-have if you want to get your recipe dialed in. You want that 18 in, 36 out, 30-second extraction time. You're at 29 seconds, you need to get to 30 seconds. You need micro adjustment to get your grind size tweaked by that little bit. If you're not doing espresso, you don't have plans on doing an espresso, you're not going to get any value by investing extra in a grinder for that feature alone. Grind by weight. So think back to that list of variables that I was playing earlier. Think back to Luigi and Eric measuring their coffee and weighing their output from the espresso machine. Ratio control is a really big aspect in finding the best flavor from your coffee as well. You'll see common in recipes. Here I have a recipe from Heart Roasters where they're saying use 22 grams of coffee. And the reason why we measure in weight in coffee rather than volume is volume doesn't take density into effect. If you think about taking a cup of flour and a cup of sugar from baking, well, think about taking a cup of coarse grind or a cup of fine grind in coffee. The difference in density between those two is significant. In your cup of coarse grind, you're going to have actually less coffee than in your cup of fine grind. And then we connect the dots is my phrase of the day. We connect the dots to that idea of one variable control for finding the best flavor. Well, if you're changing the grind size and you're measuring volumetrically, you're also changing the ratio. And now you have two variables up in the air, and that's going to make it a lot more frustrating to get the best flavor out of your coffee. So grinding by weight, really doing your ratio by weight is how you would hold that in check. You'll see that too in more advanced baking. It won't be use a cup of flour and sugar, it'll be use 100 grams and 100 grams, and the same concept applies here. You can totally do this by getting that $15 scale they were talking about earlier and weighing your beans after you grind it to make sure that you have the right weight. But if you get a grinder that has a grind by weight function, you can make your flow a lot smoother, and it's something that's a great consideration. There are other aspects outside of the specific aspects of the grinder that really I'd encourage you to take into account when you're thinking of buying anything. And value is a big one. What value does this actually provide me? In the Baratza grinders, I think about the fact that we do use burrs from people who are experts in their field, and we do have innovative features to really make your grinder perform well. We have parts, we have support, we have how-tos. We want you to get the best value out of your grinder. We want you to have great longevity. We're not going to tell you to throw it out and go get another one. Value is something that comes from the company behind the grinder, as does quality. Performance would be an aspect of the appliance of the grinder itself, and that I think of the burrs, and I think of the grind size range that it offers, the micro adjustability. Accessories can be a fun one if you like to have it stylistically matching your grinder. You can get little swag kits for it that add color, flair to your grinder, or you can have other accessories like a smaller hopper that might fit under your counter better. And then support. I'm the support manager. I have to plug support because it's something that you might have to deal with. It's the real world out there, and if you have a problem, if you have a question, then the quality of support can be a serious consideration whenever you're buying anything. We're getting close to the Q&A, and I want to get the wheels turning for you on questions you might have, if you don't have any jotted down already, by opening up this question of how to use a burr grinder. And I have a little bit of a cheeky answer for you. Follow the instructions. In our grinders anyway, we put a lot of care into writing our quick start guides. Our quick start guides will help you get the grinder out of the box, put it together, get you up and grinding, and on your way towards enjoying delicious coffee. Along with the quick start guide included with the grinder, We have on our website a page for grinding tips that gives you an idea of where you might start on your grind size, and it has some other resources there. So let me go ahead and show my, my agenda here and wrap things up and turn it over to the Q&A. Kevin?
Whenever you're ready.
Okay, I do have a question that came up, and Archimedes is and he's asking. Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. Some people are. Archimedes is asking a question. What is it, Pat?
Some people recommend not grinding the coffee in a single cycle to avoid friction.
Yes. Some people suggest not grinding the coffee in a single cycle to avoid a certain type of friction.
Ruining the coffee.
It ruins. They claim it ruins the coffee. What do you understand that? Do you think? What do you think of that?
A single cycle, they say
Yeah.
Pulse instead.
What do you recommend?
Okay. Okay. So I think what Archimedes is referencing here is the idea that heat generation can affect flavor in the bean.
Yes.
And it's a question that's come up for me a few times over the years in support. And on the support team, we have a bunch of people who are coffee professionals. They've come from roles of roasting coffee or director of coffee. And I've had this conversation with everyone in support. We're not aware of any study that actually corroborates the idea that heat generation or heat application from grinding the coffee beans does affect flavor. So I don't have a black and white answer, but I do have an idea to share, which is that when roasting coffee, it reaches temperatures way beyond what it might when you're grinding the coffee. So for me, I don't worry about the effect of heat on the flavor of coffee when you're looking at grinding in little pulses, little bursts, or grinding it all in one go. Again, though, I do recommend grinding it fresh before you brew and not batch grinding, so I want to make sure that I'm clear there.
Okay, that is clear. Mike in Cedar Rapids says, I use a Chemex. I've heard you should go coarser with this brewer. How do I know if I'm grinding out right? And I think Pierce, what he's asking about is, I'm guessing here, but I think what he's saying is how can he visually tell? What's a good way to describe that, if there is a way?
Oof, gosh. I mean, what I've heard before is, or read before, is comparisons to salt, kosher salt. But I don't find that particularly helpful from my experiences because different grinders grind coffee differently. And I've used a grind that is much finer than coarser salt and had excellent results from a Chemex from one grinder. And I've used a really coarse grind from another grinder and used it. So, that's a good one, Mike. I think my advice for you would be to check in with the manufacturer of the grinder that you're using and see if they have a recommendation. If they don't, going to the roaster is always a wonderful thing to do. You can bring a sample of your grind, you can ask for a sample of their grind, ask for some brew tips around it. But really, aside from looking at the grind, my best advice is to look at the flavor in the cup of coffee. If it's powder fine, if it's chunky, coarse, whole beans, what really matters at the end of the day is how it tastes, how that taste shows up in your cup of coffee, and you want to adjust your grind size to express that. I also want to mention that I've had some troubles with the Chemex myself, not just the grind size, finding the right grind size, but also the agitation aspect plays a large role in brewing your coffee with the Chemex. We actually have a blog on our website that talks a little bit about agitation, especially in terms of the Chemex and brewing with your sete, because it can be a two-variable situation when you're trying to perfect that one. I found some other brew methods to be a little bit easier to deal with, but by golly, the Chemex makes some fantastic coffee once you figure it out.
Yeah, I'm a Chemex guy, and I can tell you the grind is sometimes pretty strange to figure out. Part of the reason I think for that, and I'm just going to jump in as an end user, I think the filter itself on the Chemex has something to do with controlling the contact time. That, and one of the things that's hard about timing, I've heard some people say, well, you go for 4 to 6 minutes is what the industry claims for drip. in general is the contact time. Well, you know, when you're doing interval pours, you know, that's not easy to do, to add those times up and really figure it out perfectly. So I agree. I think Pierce, you probably solved it with the best ways, trial and error plus, of course, taste being the final arbiter. We have anything else?
John Reynolds.
John Reynolds has a question.
When do you know when to change the burrs?
When do you know when to change the burrs?
When to change your burrs, John? That's a good question as well. And I wish it was easy as looking at the burrs, but they are really hard to assess visually. So instead, the first place to start is to look at what the expected lifetime of the burrs should be. In the Baratza lineup, you're looking for around 500 pounds on steel burrs and 750 on the ceramics. You can do a little bit of guesswork on how much coffee you might use. If you're doing a pound a day, you're looking at maybe around 10 years would be the time span for changing your burrs. But that alone is not a consideration or not something to base your burr change on. We've had a grinder in for service that had 1,000 pounds on a set of steel burrs, and we called the customer up out of curiosity. It was actually a cafe. And they said, the performance, the taste in the cup is fantastic. No, we don't want to change the burrs. They're well seasoned, they're awesome. So use that marker, whatever the expected lifespan of the burr from your specific grinder is, just as a general marker. When you want to look a little bit closer, some other things that happen when your burrs wear is they lose the fine edge, the sharp edge on them that does a nice clean cut of the beans. So I'm really speaking for the Baratza grinders because I know them the best, but when your burrs start to wear out, your coarse grind will degrade. You'll have more fines in your coarse grind, but your fine grind, it usually still holds up because you're crushing those beans. You don't count on that sharp edge of doing the clean break quite as much. It's a little harder to notice on your espresso grind than it is in your drip grind. A slowdown in your grind speed can also be an indicator of some worn burrs because they're not able to push the coffee through as quickly. They take a little bit longer to do that pulverization of it. The easiest way to see if worn burrs are what you're dealing with is to change the burrs and see if that fixes your performance issue. But I would only get to that point if your gut check is saying, gosh, this seems like something worth spending the money on because the speed's way down, the coarse grind was great, and now it's not, and it's not because of the coffee I'm using or another one of those variables. So I hope that helps, John. That's a tricky question you got for us.
That is a tricky question, John. And as an end user, I can only tell you, I don't like to change my burrs. I just get used to some. It's like old socks, you know. I'm really comfortable with them. Anyway, that's not a very scientific answer, but you know, just do what Pierce says. Forget the guy behind this curtain. Anyway, well, thank you. I've got other questions, but I've also got a little schedule thing, right, Dennis? You want me to throw to something? Oh, we got a commercial for you guys, Pierce, and then. But thank you for being with us today. There are other questions that are going to pile up. I think this is a fascinating subject because it always gets a lot of energy. I think grinding is. Honestly, after you get a brewer you like, everything is figuring out the grind, and a grind with the same brewer, a grinder will make a tremendous difference in the quality. Thank you very much, Pierce. Good to see you again.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.
All right, we'll talk to you soon. Bye now. Yeah, he's got it. He's got the